Our last river valley civilization is the Yellow and the Yangtze, or sometimes you'll hear it pronounced Yangtze, rivers in China. They are right here. Yangtze is at the bottom, or Yangtze is at the bottom, and the Yellow is at the top. Now, to understand Chinese history, you have to know that Chinese dynasties, or how Chinese history is organized. A dynasty, once again, is when one family is in power. And the first River Valley civilizations, we're going to talk about the first four dynasties: the Shang, Zhao, Qin, and Han. There's also Sui, Tang, Song, and Yan, Ming, and Qing. But we will get to those as our semester progresses on. So the first dynasty we're going to talk about is the Shang dynasty, and this it kicks off our creation of a civilization in China because there were very, very large cities, and it was broken up into a social structure. And this is the first time you're going to hear the word aristocrat, and it's a word that you have to know from now until the end. If we were face to face, I would make you learn a rhyme where when I say aristocrat, you repeat back to me rich people who own land. And you say that over and over and over until you remember that an aristocrat is rich people who own land. That is an aristocrat, and aristocracy is that social class government system, really, too. It is a government system on top of that, because it really determines who is in power. And it's the rich people who own land who have political power. We also know that they were a religious society because of something called oracle bones. And an oracle bone was an animal bone that had questions scratched into it in writing, which also gives us another characteristic of civilization. There was writing. The questions were written on these bones, and the bones were then heated by having a hot metal rod inserted into the bone that would make the bone crack, and then priests would read the cracks as answers or messages from the gods, kind of like palm reading today. Okay, so we know that there was religion. The Zhao dynasty, so Shang dynasty is known for having large cities, the aristocracy, and oracle bones. The Zhao dynasty lasted for almost 800 years, which is crazy to think about, that we have not even been the United States of America for 300 years yet. And this was one family in power in China for 800 years. They stayed in power, the Zhao dynasty, because they really pushed this concept of something that was called the mandate of heaven. And they made the people believe that the ruler was the link between heaven and earth. And because they were such religious people didn't want to overthrow the ruler since they were the link between heaven and earth. The other thing to know about this time period is filial piety is introduced. And filial piety is the concept that male members of the family are the most important. And the oldest male is the head male of the family, and everyone else's needs have to come behind that man's. So a very patriarchal society, meaning male dominant. Okay, they had a written language. The other thing you need to know who comes in this time is a guy named Confucius. And Confucius was a philosopher, and he is still famous today. We study a lot of the things that he wrote about because he was the first person to really come up with the concept of treat others the way you wanted to be treated. His famous quote was, "Do not unto others what you would not wish done to yourself." He, bottom line, wanted the government to allow all people to participate, whether you were rich or poor, which was a huge deal. And he wanted people to give up being any kind of selfish needs and put the needs of the community first. And he thought that if they did that, things like crime would go away because he believed all crime to be selfish. Now, Confucius believed in giving people second chances and having a society, that if you broke a law, maybe you went to a jail or a prison for a couple years, but when you got out, you had a second chance. He obviously didn't believe in things like the death penalty. Other concepts in that time period, other rulers practiced something that was called legalism. And legalism is much like Hammurabi, where the idea that humans are inherently evil, and if you break a law, you need to be punished by being killed or having your hand chopped off. So still throughout Chinese history, you either have rulers that practice Confucianism after Confucius, or you have rulers that practice legalism. Okay, the Qin dynasty is famous for having a ruler that started when he was 13. Now, granted, he didn't really become the full ruler at 13, but he started at 13, his takeover process, and he is the one that built the Terracotta Army to take all of his soldiers into the afterlife with him. And then he is famous for building the Great Wall of China. Not the Great Wall that you see today. That wall was built 1,500 years later, but he did build the Great Wall to help keep out a northern enemy. And then lastly, in 9 seconds, the Han Dynasty was created by a peasant. He practiced Confucianism, and everyone loved the Han Emperor.